Hello, I am Nasreen. I am 16 years old now, but I speak to you from the memory of when I was 13, an age when most girls worry about clothes or friends, but I worried about whether the secret police would come looking for my family that night. I am not here to tell you a fairy tale where everyone ends up smiling and safe. I write to you from a place where I no longer have to look over my shoulder every 5 seconds. But my family still carries the deep scars of what happened. I want you to understand that in my country, Iran, following Jesus is not a cultural religion or a Sunday activity. It is a life or death risk. And what God did through me, a scared girl who just wanted to be normal, changed everything forever. I don't tell this so you think I am brave, because I wasn't. I tell it because the truth needs to be told. Before continuing, take a moment to subscribe to the channel, turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any testimonies, and leave in the comments where you are listening to us from. It is very important to have you participating in this community. Now, let's get back to the testimony. I grew up learning the art of silence before I even learned to write my own name. In my house, being a Christian meant being invisible, being a ghost in your own city. My first memories are of my mother's finger pressed firmly against her lips, that universal gesture of, quiet, please, be quiet. We had code words for everything. The Bible was the book, baptism was the washing, and Jesus had secret names we used in public to avoid detection. While other children at school spoke with pride about the mosque, prayers, and Ramadan, I learned to nod, smile, and change the subject quickly. Do you know what it feels like to be 7 years old and know that a careless word at recess can make your father lose his job, or worse, disappear into a prison? That constant pressure in the chest, that fear that lives with you like a second skin, was my only normal. But when I turned 12, the situation went from difficult to terrifying in a new way. It started with small things, almost imperceptible. My mother fell ill with a terrible fever, and without thinking, I put my hand on her forehead and prayed. I felt a strange heat, an electricity that didn't come from me, running through my arm. The next morning, she was completely healthy. Then it happened with my little cousin, then with a neighbor. It wasn't a coincidence, and that filled me with panic. I didn't want a gift. I wanted to survive. I wanted to be invisible, to go unnoticed, to be just another girl with her worn-out school uniform. But God seemed to have another plan, one that didn't fit with our need for secrecy. I felt like a lightning rod in the middle of a storm, charged with an energy I didn't ask for and that I knew could destroy my family's fragile balance of safety. And then the dreams began. Night after night, I saw the same woman. She was sitting against a worn brick wall, near a mosque with specific green tiles, with an old dirty rag covering her eyes. In the dream, people passed by her as if she were part of the pavement, but I couldn't stop looking at her. I felt a spiritual connection, an urgency that made me wake up sweating and with my heart racing. I recognized the street. I smelled the dust and the spices from the nearby market. A voice inside me, not audible but deafening in my spirit, repeated a single word: soon. I told my parents with a trembling voice while we ate dinner in silence. I saw the fear in my mother's eyes and the resignation in my father's. We all knew that the time of preparation was running out. God was pushing me toward a cliff, and I had to decide whether to jump or run. 2 days later, I was coming back from school when I felt something I cannot explain with logic, only with the spirit. It was like a physical pull, an invisible hand turning my shoulders so that I wouldn't take the usual path home. My heart began to beat harder, a dull drum against my ribs as I turned corners in a neighborhood I rarely visited. And then, there she was, the mosque from my dreams, with those specific green tiles shining under the afternoon sun, the market, the peeling wall. And sitting against that wall, exactly as I had seen sleeping, was the woman. The cloth over her eyes, the hand outstretched, the indifference of the people passing by. I stood paralyzed on the opposite sidewalk, feeling the cold sweat run down my back. It was no longer just a dream or an intuition. It was real. God had given me the address of my destiny, and I was terrified. I ran home, almost out of breath, and told my mother everything. She sat heavily in the kitchen chair, her face pale. We both knew that the preparation was over and the time for action was coming, But fear was a bitter taste in the mouth. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept tossing in bed, praying, asking God, what do I do? Do I just pray from afar? Do I speak to her? The only answer I received was a strange peace and the feeling that I should wait for the green light. During the following week, I passed by there every day from a distance. I found out her name was Zara. She had been blind for 15 years, a known and ignored figure in the neighborhood. I watched her and asked God for a courage that I definitely didn't have. I was a 13-year-old girl against an entire culture, against fear, against the possibility of being arrested. The sign came on a Thursday. I woke up with absolute certainty, heavy and clear in my chest. It is today. There was no thundering voice, just an unshakable knowing. I tried to swallow my breakfast, but my stomach was in knots. When I told my mother, she stopped with her cup halfway up. She saw in my eyes that I wasn't making it up. And then, she did something I will never forget. She said she would go with me. I tried to argue, to say it was too dangerous for both of us. But she was firm. I carried you in my womb, Nasrin. I won't let you face this alone. We left a note for my father on the table, in case we didn't come back. We dressed simply, trying to look invisible, two ordinary women going out shopping, but inside, we were going to a spiritual war. The bus ride there seemed to last an eternity and, at the same time, to have passed in the blink of an eye. My mother held my hand tightly, her knuckles white. We got off a few blocks away and the smell of the street, exhaust, baking bread, dust, seemed more intense, as if my senses were on high alert. Before we turned the last corner, my mother stopped, looked into my eyes and said, "Courage is not the absence of fear, daughter. It is obeying even while trembling." We took a deep breath and turned. Zara was there. The same wall, the same outstretched hand. People passed without even looking at her. I knew that, in a few minutes, I would have to break every safety rule I had learned since the cradle. I would have to step out of the shadows. My knees felt like they were made of water, but I took the first step toward her. Approaching Zara was like walking against a strong wind, a physical resistance that tried to push me away from that destiny. Every survival instinct my parents had instilled in me screamed for me to turn back, to run to the safety of anonymity. A vegetable seller nearby noticed us and shouted suspiciously, "What do you want with her?" Her voice cut the air like a blade, causing heads to turn in our direction. Zara turned her face covered by the dirty cloth toward the sound, confused and defensive. I didn't stop. I knelt on the dirty sidewalk, getting on her level, while I felt my mother's protective presence right behind me like a sentinel. "I don't have money." My voice came out trembling, almost a whisper that barely overcame the street noise. Zara recoiled slightly, tired of disappointments or mockery. "Then what do you want?" she asked, her voice hoarse and calloused. I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of curious stares accumulating. "I want to pray for you, for your eyes." The tension was instant, electric. Zara grabbed my arm with surprising strength for someone so frail, her nails digging into my skin through my uniform sleeve. "Pray to which God?" she demanded to know, suspicion dripping from every word. Around us, the murmur of the crowd grew, transforming from curiosity into latent hostility. Someone laughed scornfully in the background. "What kind of foolishness is this?" a man shouted. I was at a terrible crossroads. I could be vague, say God, and let them think it was Allah. It would be safe. It would be easy. No one would call the police for that. But I hadn't walked all that way, with my heart in my mouth, to lie. I looked at the grimy cloth covering her eyes and said, loud enough to be heard by those nearby, "I follow Jesus, and I believe He can heal you." The reaction was visceral. The word Jesus fell in that place like a bomb. "Christian!" Someone spat the word as if it were poison. "What is she doing here? Call the police!" Fear tried to suffocate me, but Zara's hand still held my arm, and she didn't let go. Incredibly, it was Zara who silenced the growing mob. "Shut up!" she screamed, her voice shaking with raw emotion. "No one has done anything for me in 15 years other than throw me coins." Let the girl speak. The shock of hearing the beggar scream made the crowd hesitate. She turned to me. "Why would this Jesus of yours care about me? I am a blind woman, useless to the world. I didn't have complex theology. I didn't have prepared arguments, just the truth burning in my chest. Because he sees you, I replied, with tears beginning to blur my own vision. He loves you and knows you. She nodded slowly, a silent permission born of desperation. I brought my hands to her face, feeling the rough, hot skin under my trembling fingers. I began to pray, not in ritualistic Arabic, but in Farsi, our mother tongue, with the simple words of a child. Jesus, please have mercy. As I spoke, the fear abruptly disappeared, replaced by an intense heat, an electricity that didn't come from me, but flowed through me. My hands burned. The noise of the street seemed to have been sucked into a vacuum. There was only me, Zara, and the palpable, almost heavy presence of God. When I finished, I lowered my hands, and the silence around us was absolute, dense. Zara remained motionless for a second that seemed to last an hour. Then, she gasped, a strangled sound, and brought her hands to her face, ripping the cloth from her eyes with desperate urgency. She blinked frantically against the sunlight, stunned, and then her eyes focused on mine. They were clear, alive, without the white fog of blindness. I see, she whispered, touching my face with reverence as if checking reality. And then she screamed, a sound that tore the air, a mixture of pure joy and terror. I see! I can see! Chaos exploded around us. The vegetable seller dropped a basket, tomatoes rolling down the sidewalk. People recoiled with superstitious fear, murmuring about witchcraft or jinn. Others pushed forward to see the impossible. That angry man started shouting about blasphemy and deception. My mother pulled me hard by the shoulder, breaking my trance. Nasrin, now, we have to go. The miracle had happened, the glory of God had descended, but now the brutal reality of danger was about to fall upon us. Zara tried to hold my hand, not wanting to lose contact with the source of her new reality, asking my name repeatedly as if she wanted to engrave it on her soul. Nasrin, I said, but completed with desperate urgency while my mother pulled me. It wasn't me, it was Jesus. Thank him. We let go, and that moment of physical disconnection was like cutting an umbilical cord. We started to retreat, and as I moved away, I saw Zara stand up, standing on her own for the first time in years, facing the furious and confused crowd like a lioness defending her cubs. I was blind, and now I see, she shouted, her voice echoing above the tumult. What else matters? We turned and started walking fast, almost running, but without running so as not to draw even more attention. We didn't go to the bus stop. It would be too obvious. We dove into the labyrinth of side streets, narrow alleys, and passages my mother knew instinctively, looking back at every corner, hearts beating in our throats. The sound of the confusion was left behind, but the image of Zara seeing the sky for the first time was burned into my retina. It took us almost 2 hours to get home, taking a tortuous path and stopping in a dirty alley just to cry in each other's arms for a few minutes, releasing the adrenaline that threatened to make us faint. When we finally turned the key in the door of our apartment, my father was already there. He had come back from work early, sensing in his spirit that something had changed, holding my mother's crumpled note in his calloused hand. When he saw us enter, pale and trembling but alive, he released the breath he seemed to have been holding for hours. We told him everything. The fear, the prayer, the heat, Zara's scream. He listened in absolute silence, moving from disbelief to awe, and finally, to a terrifying gravity. He hugged us and prayed, thanking God. But when he opened his eyes, they were dark with worry. This won't stay like this, he said quietly. The whole city will know by sunset. We need to be ready. He was right. The news ran through the underground Christian community and the Muslim streets like fire in dry straw. The phone started ringing. It was other believers speaking in codes, some euphoric about the miracle, others terrified of the consequences. They said the religious police were already asking questions in Zara's neighborhood, that the local imam was furious, demanding to find the Christian witch. Pastor David arrived at our apartment at dusk, his face marked by deep lines of fatigue and tension. He confirmed what we feared. We had broken the golden rule of Christian survival in Iran. We had done something public, undeniable, and in the name of Jesus. He looked at me, not with anger, but with a deep and proud sadness. God used you, Nasrin, he said. But the gifts of God in this country come with a price of blood. You need to prepare to disappear. That night was the longest of my life. No one slept. My older brother, Reza, was furious. He paced from one side of the small living room to the other, his steps muffled by the carpet, looking at me as if I had set fire to our house on purpose. "Why couldn't you stay quiet?" he hissed, his voice loaded with fear for his own future. "Now we are all going to pay for this." My father pushed our old sofa against the front door, a futile and symbolic gesture, as if an old piece of furniture could stop the Revolutionary Guard, but which gave us a pathetic illusion of safety. We turned off all the lights and sat in the dark, listening. Every car that passed on the street, every voice in the building's hallway, every creak of wood made our blood run cold. We were in our own home, but we were already refugees. Waiting for the knock on the door was a slow psychological torture, and I knew, with a crushing weight in my stomach, that our normal life had ended forever. Shortly after midnight, the phone rang for the last time. It was Pastor David with the order we feared. We had to leave, now. He knew an elderly couple on the other side of the city with a safe hideout. My father hung up and looked at us with tired eyes. One suitcase each, only the essentials. We leave before dawn. I went to my room and stood in the dark, looking at the shadows of my few belongings. What do you choose to take when you don't know if you're coming back? How do you summarize a whole life in a school backpack? I packed my Bible hidden among clothes, the notebook where I wrote down my dreams, and a family photo. I left behind my books, my bed, the view from the window. I left behind childhood. We left stealthily in the darkest moment of the night, before the first call to prayer, locking the door behind us with the chilling sensation that perhaps we would never turn that key to enter again. The hideout was a tiny room at the back of that couple's house, a sort of poorly built annex with a single high window that looked out onto a dead-end alley. There were 2 thin mattresses on the floor and a weak light bulb. That square of cement became our entire universe. In the first days, fear paralyzed us so much that we barely moved. The couple brought us food and whispered news, but most of the time was spent in a suffocating silence. Reza, my brother, barely spoke to me. He spent the days lying down, staring at the ceiling with an anger that burned silently. My parents tried to keep a facade of calm, but I heard my mother crying softly when she thought I was asleep. The reality of what we had done, of what I had done, began to weigh on me like an anchor, dragging me into deep guilt. We were safe, yes, but we were trapped. The news filtering in from the outside world was a mix of terror and hope. We learned that the religious police had broken into our apartment hours after we left. They interrogated neighbors, turned everything upside down. There was an active arrest warrant for my parents, and I was being sought as an agitator. But amidst this, we heard about Zara. They took her for interrogation, tried to make her deny the miracle, threatened her. But she, that woman who had been ignored her whole life, found a backbone of steel. She refused to lie. "I was blind. Jesus healed me. Now I see," she repeated to the enraged officers. Her stubbornness was causing an uproar. Some said it was black magic, others were secretly marveled. Our escape and her courage turned the incident into an urban legend that grew every day. But for us, it meant the hunt wasn't going to stop anytime soon. The isolation began to corrode my faith. In that stuffy room, I couldn't pray as before. I asked God, "Why did you give me this gift if it would destroy my family? Why did you ask for my obedience if the cost was living like a rat in a hole?" I felt abandoned. One night, seeing my despair, my mother sat beside me on the mattress. She didn't try to sugarcoat it. "Faith is not a shield against suffering, Nasrin," she whispered, stroking my hair. "Look at the early church. They were imprisoned, flogged, killed. But it was through their faithfulness that the gospel reached us." She told me that Zara's healing wasn't just for Zara. It was a sign, a seed planted in the hard concrete of our country. "We may be hidden," she said, "but the truth you released in the streets is free, and nothing can lock it up again." Those words were the only oxygen that allowed me to keep breathing in those endless weeks. After 2 weeks of confinement, Pastor David came to visit us late at night, looking 10 years older. He brought a mix of news that was like honey and gall. The gall. The repression had intensified throughout the city. Several house churches were being shut down preemptively, and some Christians, dominated by fear, openly blamed us. They said we were reckless, that we sought personal glory, and put the entire community at risk because of a single miracle. Hearing this hurt like a physical slap. The rejection from my own brothers in faith was a wound I didn't expect. But the honey was sweet and shocking. Zara remained firm, refusing to deny what happened, and her insistence on the truth was generating deep fissures in the Muslim community. 3 people who witnessed or heard about the miracle: the vegetable seller who shouted at us, a young neighbor named Hassan, and incredibly, the wife of a local imam, had sought out believers secretly. They didn't want to report us. They wanted to know who this Jesus was, who opened the eyes of the blind when Allah remained silent for 15 years. This revelation changed something fundamental inside me. I was still afraid, yes, and the pain of being considered reckless by other Christians still burned. But knowing that devout Muslims, people who would never dare question their faith before, were now risking everything to seek Jesus, that made the weight in my chest seem to have a purpose. Pastor David told us, with a gleam in his tired eyes, that these 3 seekers were being discipled with the utmost secrecy. I realized then that Zara's healing wasn't an end in itself, but a skeleton key that unlocked spiritual doors that had been closed in that neighborhood for centuries. I began to understand what my mother said about the cost of discipleship. Maybe, just maybe, the suffering and isolation of my family were the price necessary to buy the spiritual freedom of those people. If my reckless obedience brought salvation to an enemy's house, then I would accept the blame. But theology, however comforting, did not solve our immediate and practical problem. We couldn't live in that cement annex forever. Pastor David was frank about our limited options. We could try to flee to Turkey through the mountains, a very expensive and dangerous journey with smugglers who often robbed or abandoned refugees. We could turn ourselves in and hope for a clemency we knew didn't exist. Or we could continue hiding, moving from house to house, and wait for the dust to settle. That night, we had the hardest family meeting of our lives. Reza was vehement, almost aggressive. "We have to go. Now. Staying here is suicide." He was 18 years old, his whole life ahead of him, and saw his chances for a future evaporating in that room. My mother cried silently, torn between the primitive instinct to protect her children at any cost and the faith that told her to stay. My father, with a grave face, looked at me. The 13-year-old girl who started all this. "What do you think, Nasreen?" he asked. I trembled as I answered, feeling the weight of that responsibility. I remembered the story of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego before the furnace, which I read so many times in the last few days. I told them that maybe God would deliver us, maybe not, but that we had already lit a spiritual fire in that city, and I felt we couldn't just run away before seeing what God would do with it. I said I felt, deep in my spirit, that our mission in Iran wasn't over, that running away now would be abandoning the work halfway. My father stayed silent for a long time, praying with his eyes open. When he finally spoke, the decision was made. "We stay," he said with a firm voice, although his hands shook slightly. "God planted us here for a reason. If we flee now, we will lose the harvest." Reza was furious, punched the mattress, and refused to speak to us for the rest of the night, isolating himself in a corner. But he knew he wouldn't abandon the family. The decision was made. We would stay in the lion's mouth, trusting only that God would keep it shut. The weeks dragged on, turning into months of a ghostly existence. We moved hideouts once, guided by rumors of searches in neighboring districts, and every move was a military operation of fear and caution. But while our bodies were confined, the seeds of the gospel were blooming out there in ways we could barely believe. We received news through our whisper network that Hassan, the young neighbor who had the dreams, had decided for Jesus. His baptism was held in the middle of the night, in an old bathtub in an unknown apartment, with only 2 witnesses trembling with fear and joy. Hearing this was like drinking fresh water in the desert. Our suffering wasn't sterile, it was generating life. But the personal cost continued to rise. My uncle, my father's own brother, who had already denounced us years ago, went further this time. He went to a local radio station and, with a voice full of righteous indignation, denounced the shameful deviation of his brother and niece, painting us as traitors to the nation and the faith, agents of Western influence. Hearing my father cry silently upon learning that his own blood publicly called for his arrest was a sound that broke something inside me that was never fixed. 3 months after going underground, my body gave in to the constant stress. I caught a bad flu that quickly evolved into a dangerous fever. Under normal circumstances, we would have gone to a clinic. There, hidden in that damp room, without access to doctors or proper medicine, illness seemed like a death sentence. My mother made cold compresses with old rags, her eyes hollow with worry, fearing I would die not from martyrdom, but from forced negligence. During the days of delirium, I had feverish and confused visions. I saw Zara's face, I saw crowds, I saw a shining cross and heard voices in tongues I didn't understand. My parents watched my irregular breathing, terrified that my obedience to God would end there, on a dirty mattress on the floor. But the fever broke. When I woke up, weak and sweaty, I had a limpid and crystal-clear thought, devoid of any previous doubt. God wasn't done with me. There was more. I hadn't survived that fever to stay hidden forever. The confirmation of this feeling came days later with a message that seemed like an obvious trap. Zara wanted to see me. The underground network informed us that she knew we were still in the city and insisted on a meeting. "It's a trap," my father said immediately, his protective instinct screaming. "They are using her as bait to catch us." It was the logical conclusion. But the believers who brought the message insisted that Zara was sincere, that she was reading a clandestine Bible and had questions no one else could answer. She wanted to thank the girl who had the courage to pray. We argued for 2 whole days. The risk was astronomical. If it were a trap, it would be the end of us all. But the opportunity to consolidate that woman's faith, to ensure that the physical miracle became spiritual salvation, was irresistible. We decided that my mother and I would go. My father and Reza would stay. It was a life-or-death bet, and we decided to put all our chips on God's faithfulness. The meeting was arranged on a Friday night, in a neutral apartment. We were taken there blindfolded for security, a maximum precaution so we couldn't reveal the location under torture. When the blindfold was removed, I blinked in the dim light of a Spartan room, and there she was. Zara was sitting on a worn sofa, but she looked like another person. Her eyes, once covered and dead, now shone with a living and curious intelligence. When she saw me, she jumped up and ran to me, kneeling at my feet before I could stop her, weeping copiously. She didn't just thank me for physical sight. She said something that completely disarmed me. "Thank you for seeing me when I was invisible. Thank you for loving me enough to stop." At that moment, I explained to her, with an urgency born of the brevity of our meeting, who Jesus was. Not the prophet of Islam, but the incarnate God who healed her eyes because he loved her. There, in that secret room, under risk of death, Zara surrendered her life to Christ, sealing the miracle with eternity. That moment with Zara changed the atmosphere of our hideout. When we returned and told my father and Reza what had happened, I saw something change in my brother's face. For the first time in months, anger gave way to a reluctant respect. Even he had to admit that it wasn't a coincidence or madness, but something divine. That night was a turning point. It didn't solve our legal situation, it didn't remove the arrest warrant, but it gave us a purpose. We began to receive news of other conversions, like waves spreading from a stone thrown into a lake. Miriam, the vegetable seller who had shouted at us that day, couldn't deny what her eyes saw. She sought out the believers, was discipled, and ended up leading her own teenage daughter to Christ. Knowing that that hostile woman was now my sister in Christ was a constant reminder that God sees hearts where we only see threats. We were trapped in a room, but the kingdom of God was advancing in the streets because of our obedience. But not all stories had immediate happy endings. The most impactful and painful conversion was that of Fatima, the wife of the local imam. She started seeking the truth secretly after hearing her husband complain obsessively about the fake healing. Curiosity turned into faith, but the cost for her was devastating. When her husband found out, The divorce was instant and brutal. He took custody of the 3 children, kicked her out of the house, and forbade any contact. Fatima lost her reputation, her home, her status, and most painfully, her children. I met with her months later at a secret women's meeting. She was thin, with deep dark circles of someone who cried every night, but when she spoke of Jesus, her face shone with a peace that made no human sense. She told me, "I lost my children, yes, and that pain never goes away, but I gained eternity. Jesus is worth all of that." Hearing that from a woman who lost much more than I did silenced any complaint about my own life. 4 months after the day of the healing, the authorities' attention finally began to shift. There were political protests in the capital, new economic crises, and the search for the healer girl's family ceased to be a top priority. Pastor David told us we could leave strict hiding, not to return to our old life, that was impossible, but to try to live with caution in another neighborhood. We moved to a poor area of the city where no one knew us. My father found work in construction using a fake name. I couldn't go back to school, the risk of recognition was too high, so my mother continued teaching me at home. We started attending a new house church, a group of 15 people meeting in basements, whispering praises. Life wasn't normal, it was a new normal, made of furtive glances and constant fears. But we were free from that tiny room. We were alive. During this period, I learned that the gift of healing wasn't a magic wand I controlled. I prayed for a man with cancer in our new church. We fasted and cried out, but he passed away 3 months later. This shook my faith. Why Zara and not him? Why did God intervene so dramatically that day and now seemed silent? Pastor David helped me understand the sovereignty of God. He reminded me that the purpose of miracles isn't physical comfort, but pointing to Jesus. On the other hand, I prayed for a 7-year-old girl with a deformed foot that caused much pain. Nothing happened at the time. I felt like a fraud. But over the course of 3 months, her foot straightened gradually, day after day, until it was perfect. It was a slow-motion miracle, as divine as the instant one, but requiring patience. I learned that God is not a vending machine where we insert prayer and retrieve the desired product. He is a Father who knows what is best, even when his answer is no or wait. When I turned 15, our family had already been living with the consequences of that day for 2 years, but the biggest change was yet to come. Reza, my older brother, couldn't take it anymore. He was 19, stuck in a life without a future, working odd jobs and always looking back. He gathered every penny he earned and paid a smuggler to take him to Turkey. The goodbye was on a cold winter night, quick and painful, without knowing if we would ever see each other again. My mother cried for days, terrified by stories of refugees dying in the crossing, but we all knew he needed to go. He was suffocating there. Months later, we received the news. He was safe in Germany and had been granted religious asylum. A part of me felt a deep and human envy. He was free, could sing praises out loud, could walk the street without fear. But, at the same time, I felt a strange peace about staying. I knew, against all logic, that my place was still there, in the eye of the hurricane, where God continued to write our story. The underground church continued to grow, not like an explosion, but like strong roots breaking concrete silently. Every new convert who arrived brought a story of sacrifice that made me feel small. I met a young man studying to be an imam. He had his entire future guaranteed as a religious leader, but Jesus confronted him through the scriptures. He left everything, was disinherited by his family, lost his prestige, but told me with a smile on his face, "I taught religion, but I didn't know God. Now I know him." I met an elderly couple, over 70 years old, who converted together. Their children stopped talking to them, but they said, "We wasted 70 years on the wrong path. We won't waste even one more second." These stories were the fuel that kept me standing. I learned that obedience isn't a one-time event, like that day with Zara. It's a daily and monotonous choice to continue believing when nothing spectacular happens and life is just difficult. At 16, we finally found a certain precarious stability. My father had a steady job, though far below his capacity, and my mother taught neighborhood children. Our expanded family, however, was the greatest blessing. Zara, the former blind beggar, now worked cleaning houses and used every opportunity to speak of Jesus with a simple wisdom that disarmed people. She became a leader in the house church, discipling other women. Hassan, the neighbor from the dreams, moved near us and became like a second brother to me. Miriam and her daughter were also firm. It was incredible to see how those lives, once unconnected, now formed a living and pulsing body. We were a family forged in the fire of persecution, united by bonds stronger than blood. That act of obedience by a 13-year-old girl hadn't just healed eyes. It had created a community. The greatest joy, however, came from Fatima. The Imam's ex-wife, who had lost everything, received a gift from God that no human court could take away. Her eldest daughter, now 17, defied her father's orders and sought out her mother to understand the reason for such madness. After months of clandestine conversations, the daughter also surrendered to Jesus. Fatima told me this with tears running down her face. I lost my children to the world, but I gained one for eternity. They were now sisters in Christ. Looking back, I see the ripples of impact from that day spreading to places I never imagined. I don't know the full picture. I never will. But I know that Zara's healing was the spark that lit fires in hearts all over the city. God used the fear and obedience of a teenager to shame the wise and strong. I lost my normal adolescence, yes, but I gained a front-row seat to see God operate real miracles. Looking at everything now, I cannot say what the future holds for us. Maybe we will continue in Iran, living in these shadows, serving God in whispers until He calls us home or opens another door. The arrest warrant still exists. The threat is real and palpable, like the air we breathe. Maybe we will be arrested tomorrow. Maybe we will never see my brother again. But if I could go back to that morning 3 years ago, knowing all the pain, all the fear, everything we would lose, I would do it all again, without hesitating, because Zara's soul was worth it. Because Hassan, Miriam, Fatima, and so many others were worth it. Because Jesus is worth it. I learned that a safe life is an illusion. The only real safety is in being in the center of God's will, even if that center is a battlefield. I share this not so you feel sorry for us, but so you understand that faith costs dearly. I don't want you to think of Christianity as a comfortable social club, but as a radical surrender. I want you to know that Jesus is not a distant historical figure. He is alive, dangerous, and irresistible. He is the God who descends to the dirty streets of Iran to touch the eyes of a beggar, and He is the God who sustains a fugitive family in a room without windows. If my story serves for anything, let it be to wake you from this lethargy of an easy faith. May it be a reminder that following Christ is losing your life to find it for real. As for the gift, that is the part that still haunts me. Since that intense period, the manifestations diminished until they ceased almost completely. Today, I look at my hands, and they seem just like normal teenager hands, with calluses from helping with chores and pen ink stains. I have tried to pray with the same intensity for other sick people, tried to summon that electricity. I felt flow to Zara's eyes, but heaven often remains silent. There is no formula. There is no magic button. That power wasn't mine to possess or control. It was a sacred loan for a specific purpose in a specific time. God didn't give me a superpower. He gave me a task, and the task was accomplished. Sometimes, late at night, I still feel a phantom tingling in the palms of my hands, a physical memory of that fire that wasn't of this world. I lie awake looking into the dark, trying to understand God's logic. Why was Zara healed instantly and the man with cancer died? Why was I chosen in that moment and now seem so ordinary again? I have no answers. The phenomenon came like a sudden wind that knocks down trees and then disappears, leaving only the landscape altered forever. I cannot explain, I cannot replicate, and I cannot forget. All I know is that for a brief and terrifying moment, the infinite touched the earth through me and then receded into mystery, leaving me here, marked forever by the inexplicable.
And you? Would you have the courage to obey God, even knowing that it could cost everything you have? Or would safety speak louder? I really want to know what you think. Write in the comments. Have you ever felt God asking you for something difficult? Share your experience. If this story touched your heart, subscribe to the channel and turn on the notification bell right now. It is the only way to ensure you don't miss the next transformative testimonies we are preparing. Don't leave yet. I selected this next video that will appear on the screen now. I am sure it will speak deeply to you. Click and watch. Thank you for the company. May God bless your life.